Hey, welcome back to another installment of Unsolicited Cognitions. Tonight we're doing something a little bit different, Usually on this channel we cover, music, video games, some combination of the two. But this time we're actually going to be talking about a TV show, or more specifically, a streaming series. This isn't usually something I do just because I'm not much of a TV watcher. I prefer to play games in my free time. But a show recently came out that, given the things that I like, there was just no way I could ignore it. So, like the title says, tonight we're talking about the adventures of Fionna and Cake. I don't think that's the exact title, but whatever, you know what I mean. The suicide bombers in this game are just absurd, man. Before we get into our main topic, though, something kind of bittersweet that I want to mention. This, or in the next couple videos I do, might be the last time you see two longtime members of this channel. My couch here, which has been a faithful member of the channel since I started doing these videos, and this pair of glasses, which, as you can see, they're at the end of the line. They will be dearly missed. They put in a lot of hard work on this channel, and I appreciate them. With that out of the way, let's get into the main topic tonight, which I'll give you a brief overview of how I felt, and then I'll get into spoiler territory. So in case you're somebody who's watching this video and has not watched the show yet, you just want a general overview of what it's about, and if it would be something for you, I can help with that. This game gives me a fucking headache, dude. So to begin with, immediate recommend. Immediate S tier. Thank God we live in a universe where Fionna and Cake was greenlit and exists. Not just for the fact of how good the show ended up being, but it's just for how cool it is to see what happens when you give a group of people who are really passionate about something the resources to make the thing that they want to make, that they know other people are going to want to see. Here he comes to suicide bomb me. What even am I supposed to do? It's just the amount of love and effort that went into this show is insane, and it's very obvious when you watch it. Which, I should also put this out there, do not watch Fionna and Cake if you have not watched the two shows that preceded it, right? So the entirety of the original Adventure Time, and then also Distant Lands, alright? You need to have watched both for this one. If you haven't watched both, not only are you going to spoil pretty much every major plot point for yourself, but you're also going to be watching a story that's just not gonna make a whole lot of sense to you. So do yourself a favor, watch both the shows first. They're both really good as well. And yeah. Oh, come the fuck on, dude. Of course, and I can't see shit. Of course, dude. As you can see, tonight I'm playing Lords of the Fallen, but I'm getting pretty annoyed, so we'll see if I actually end up playing this the whole time. This game's been kind of contentious in the gaming community. Some people are saying, oh, it's the best Souls-like ever made. Other people are saying it's god-awful. A lot of people, though, are saying, it's okay. Where am I at? I think it's pretty damn good. I just think that there's some really stupid decisions that they made with it. They made a great game, and then they decided to do some really stupid things in terms of some of the design. Not to mention, there are some technical aspects here and there that get in the way of actually being able to do what you need to do to get through the game. I'm not going to get all of it. This video is not about Lords of the Fallen. We'll do another one for this game another night. So now we're going to start getting into some spoilers. So if you haven't seen all three of the shows yet, you might want to tune out. It's worth mentioning that when it comes to Adventure Time, I'm pretty biased. I remember watching the pilot episodes of the original show almost 15 years ago when it first came on. So for me and a lot of people my age, Adventure Time holds a pretty special place in our hearts, which they knew that when they made this show. Hiding behind your shield like a pussy. Great. I love getting staggered by fire. So we're going to do this in three parts. I'm going to talk about the structure of the overall thing, then we'll talk about the journey that Fionna and Cake take, and then finally the finale. You're not going to follow me, you piece of shit? It's amazing how much a simple change in weapons can make your life easier. To talk about this show, you have to talk about the multiverse. And I don't even mean just in Adventure Time, I just mean in fiction in general. And it's kind of popular right now to say that the multiverse is played out, that people are sick of it, that it's like, oh, Marvel did it, now everybody's doing it. And I don't know. I mean, from a certain perspective, that might be true, but people who say that often talk about the multiverse as though Marvel invented it, which is not the case. The multiverse has been a thing in all kinds of fiction for many years now. Well, of course, there's a fire-breathing dog right there, off to the side, out of the screen. Is that one of the beacons? Well, no fucking wonder it was so hard to get up here. No wonder it was so hard to get up here. That was one of the goddamn beacons. Alright, well, I feel better now. But yeah, Fionna and Cake has a lot to do with the multiverse. In fact, that's almost the entire kind of premise of the show. The original Adventure Time dealt with the multiverse a little bit. There's the iconic episode where the Lich has taken over Billy's body and has made it into Prismo's wish room. And so Finn makes a wish for the Lich to never exist, but in doing so creates a completely different universe. And it ends on this bizarre cliffhanger that if you were like me when this episode came out as a kid, it kind of floored you. It was my first experience with the idea of the multiverse and alternate realities and all that kind of stuff. It was pretty heady. And then, of course, you have the episode where they go back to the multiverse to stop the Lich as he exists in Farm World. One of the big things in the original show was whether or not Fionna and Cake were real. If you recall, the original show presented Fionna and Cake as a fan fiction that the Ice King wrote as part of his weird frenemy obsession with Finn and Jake. Everybody is obviously a takeoff of somebody in Ooh, it's just gender swapped, and that's the whole thing. There's an episode later on where the Ice King is like, oh, Fionna and Cake, I know you guys are out there somewhere. And it's kind of this thing of like, well, does the Ice King know that? Does he know something we don't, or is he just being crazy? Adventure Time, the original show, ended. Fionna and Cake were never seen again, and we all just kind of assumed that they were, in fact, a figment of his imagination. Which, let's get one thing straight. I understand that retconning is a thing, but just given the way that Adventure Time is, I think it's very possible, almost likely, that the writers put that scene in knowing that they might later want to, or have an opportunity to, do something with Fionna and Cake outside of the regular show. And yeah, they got their chance. Oh god, not the dogs. I was hoping they wouldn't see me. The show starts up with a girl who we clearly recognize as Fionna and a cat that we clearly recognize as Cake. And from there on, it just seeing the town was such a treat. Like, seeing the regular world that Fionna and Cake live in was such a joy. Because there's all these little Easter eggs. You see somebody hanging out at the bus stop who looks like Marceline's old boyfriend. Or you see the Magic Man hat on a sign or something like that. All these little details, and it makes you go like, okay, well, clearly there's some kind of connection here. I can see all the characters I recognize. I know who these people are. But they don't look or act anything like I remember them looking or acting like. What's going on? A truth which is borne out as we continue into our secondary and tertiary plot lines of the show. 3 stories are presented in this show. One is Fionna and Cake's adventure. Number 2 is Simon and him trying to reconcile what happened with Betty, who, as you remember, gave up her life, basically, at the end of the show, to become the entity of chaos that was threatening, Golb. Since Golb cannot be killed, her only option was to meld with Golb and become the new being, who they now refer to as Golb Betty. Which, if memory serves, was just a fan nickname for a while, but is now canonical because Simon actually does call her that during this show.
I'm with Golb Betty.
Which is kind of fun. I always like when fan things become canonical. And the tertiary storyline that takes place mainly between Fiona's friends, Marshall Lee and Gary Prince, who we recognize as, this world's versions of Marceline and Princess Bubblegum. So we know obviously that there's probably going to be a romance. It doesn't start off that way, so we're left wondering how are these two going to get together, and the process of that happening forms the basis of that tertiary storyline, which provides a nice counterpoint to all the wild fantasy shit going on in the rest of the show. My favorite, terrain damage. That's also kind of what's nice about the whole multiverse thing. I like the idea of recurring iconography, of recognizing certain symbols but seeing them through a different lens. I like the idea of certain things, connections, relationships, events, transcending space and time. Like, they're that important to the fabric of things. And I don't know if it was just the fact that I've been watching the series for 14 years or just the power that iconography has, and I've talked a little bit about that on this channel. But watching the first episode of this show made me really emotional. Not just because it was nice to see this IP that I loved getting another meaningful story told in the universe, but also just because seeing all these characters and things that I recognize and love was through another lens. In multiverse stuff, for some reason, it's always an emotional thing for me. I don't know why. Comment below if you feel similarly. I know for my part, a Fionna and Cake spinoff is something that I've been hoping for a while, and I know I'm not the only one. So seeing it finally happen was a big moment. Watching the first episode felt very surreal. It felt very surreal that whole thing of Ice King being like, oh, I know you're real out there somewhere. All those years ago, it felt very surreal that we were finally being given a hard, canonical vindication of that. Oh my God, dude, this is so stupid. Oh, great. Knew you were going to come back as a regular enemy eventually. But what's really kind of interesting about how they present this first episode is that you can see that Fionna doesn't like her life. This Fionna is nothing like the Finn that she's based off of. She's tired and seems a little depressed. At the very least, she is not fond of her job or her daily life routine. And then juxtaposed against that, you get the story of Simon, taking place after the conclusion of the original trilogy. So at this point, he's depressed too. He's lost the love of his life twice now. And this time, there's literally no way he's ever going to get her back because she's a multiversal cosmic entity now that exists outside of space and time, basically. She's gone forever. Simon can't accept that, so the impetus for the rest of the plot of the show is him attempting to communicate with Betty, basically trying to open a portal to the dimension where she resides now as Golb. He's using Choose Goose for this process, who is now evil, so he's using his energy as a spell battery, he says. And while trying to open a portal to Betty, he ends up opening a portal into Fionna and Cake's world. And Cake, with her animal instincts, picks up on this before Fionna does, jumps through the portal, winds up in U, where Simon recognizes the cat. Gives her the translator, presumably the same universal translator, I guess, that Finn and Jake used in the episode where we meet Tiffany for the first time. Simon tries to do the spell again, ends up summoning Fionna this time, reunites with Cake, and then they all get summoned to Prismo's wish room, where Prismo explains what's really going on. So Prismo explains that Fionna and Cake were actually always quote-unquote real. They always existed. It's just the whole thing was that he made them as a fanfic. A fanfic that was unauthorized by the greater powers of the multiverse, so he had to hide the universe in the head of someone where they would never find it. The Ice King, supposedly the craziest person in U. So, when the Ice King became Simon again, and the magic went out of his head, the magic went out of Fionna and Cake's world as well. And so now it's what it is when we see it at the beginning of the show. And so one of two major plots is that Simon is trying to get another crown so that he can become the Ice King again and re-magic their world. The only issue with that is that their crown is gone. So in the midst of all this, Prismo is being audited, basically, by a guy called the Scarab. Basically, Prismo created a universe and he wasn't supposed to, so now he's in trouble with, the God Auditor, essentially. So the God Auditor shows up, realizes that Fionna and Cake are somewhere around there. They escape just in the nick of time. The Scarab imprisons Prismo, and so now that is the means for the plot. So we've got a few conflicts going on here. We've got Prismo trying to keep his job from the God Auditor, the Scarab, who is our villain, our main villain of the story. We've got Fionna, Cake, and Simon trying to find a new crown so that he can become the Ice King again. And thus begins the insane multiverse jumping adventure that comprises the majority of the show. All of that is just the setup, right? So talking a little bit about Adventure Time. Adventure Time's handling of lore has always been really good in my opinion. It's always been this really good balance of creating this crazy, cartoonish, super imaginative worlds and rules and monsters and whatnot that also function off of an almost D&D-like structuring of things, which was done very deliberately. Of course. I don't know if I want to play this anymore, dude. Fuck that. So if you know anything about Adventure Time, you know that it placed a greater emphasis on lore as it went on. And some people took issue with that. Some people felt like it was Adventure Time getting too heady for its own good, going too far up its own ass, or I've heard it described in many ways. I should say, if that shift was something that bothered you, you're not going to like this show, because it leans so hard into the extended lore stuff that the later seasons of the show created. It leans very hard into that stuff. But if you were one of the many people who enjoyed the additional world building, this show is going to be a real treat for you. Not to mention, the way that Adventure Time handled its lore as it went on made complete sense. In the very earliest seasons of the show, Adventure Time always had this kind of veneer effect going on. It always felt like it was this idyllic, whimsical dreamscape, but just under the surface of it lurked like unimaginable nightmares. And that is indeed what it was. That was almost literally the lore of the show, and they really kind of leaned into that the longer it went on. Like, one great example is that scene where the Lich shows the King of Oo the eldritch truth of the universe, you know? That's how you do it. You're gonna have suicide bombers in the game. They need to make a loud noise so that the player can know that they're coming. You want to spawn suicide bombers in off screen, that's fine. They just have to make noise. You can't just have them be silent. Take notes, Lords of the Fallen. Take notes. Another great example of the veneer effect, Jake's death in Distant Lands. It starts off where Finn and Jake are having an adventure, and it's very deliberately done in a style that's more reminiscent of the early episodes of Adventure Time, before we see that it's Finn living in a fantasy world and hallucinating the whole thing, basically. One of the big things that we see the characters grappling with in Fionna and Cake is the death of Jake. We saw how bad it kind of messed Finn up in Distant Lands, which of course it did. Jake was his brother and his best friend. Jake was his whole world. And they leave it to your imagination to imagine how Jake died, which I almost wish they wouldn't do, because they imply that it wasn't peaceful, and the deaths that I could imagine are worse, I'm sure, than what they could put on screen. But yeah, Jake's dead, and the two primary people that affects are Finn and Prismo. We can see that Prismo is depressed. He's just watching different adventures around the multiverse on a loop. And Finn, we know because of Distant Lands that Finn is in a real bad way, but we can see that he's trying to cope by making it his business to cheer up the people around him, namely Simon, who he takes on an adventure in a misguided attempt to take his mind off of tragedy. And I always thought that was kind of a dark beat. For a show that was often very whimsical and happy, I always thought that the idea, like, even though they didn't show it on screen, the implication that Finn lived decades of his life just depressed and traumatized because of however it was that he lost to Jake, even if they don't show you. So in a way, it's actually kind of nice that they incorporated this part into the plot, because it shows us that, yeah, even though Finn experienced this terrible thing, he still had enough hope in him to do what it was that he did best and go around and make people happy. Literally the worst possible thing that could happen in Finn's life happened. It still didn't kill his zest for life. So that was nice. Ooh! Ooh! But yeah, of all the stories in the show, I found Simon's to be especially tragic. Not just because of what we've already seen him go through, you know, because obviously the Ice King's story was incredibly tragic in the original show, but also just because of, like, what we're kind of seeing him deal with now. In the wake of the whole Golbetti situation, not only is he depressed, but we also get a peek into the issues that he has to deal with living as a man out of time. A Captain America situation. Dude's been alive for like 1,000 years probably. We see that he's got a job in one of the new human cities trying to teach kids about human history before the Mushroom War and everything. but a lot of the kids are bored, and a lot of the kids just want him to be like the fun, silly Ice King that writes fun fantasy stories again. And it's really sad because everybody talks about the Ice King and the books that he wrote like it's this great thing. And for Simon, that's one of the darkest times of his life. He had no mental agency, he had no control or often even awareness of his surroundings, his history. So the fact that there's all these people who just want him to be Simon again is really viscerally sad. Dealing with these feelings of like, I don't want to be the Ice King anymore. And it's even worse because Betty made the ultimate sacrifice so that he got to be Simon again, and now nobody wants him to be Simon. It's really fucked. So the arc that he's dealing with in the show is the idea that he feels worthless. He feels like he sucks and doesn't deserve to exist, basically. And the different ways that they engage with that throughout the show is really interesting. And this show is just as much Simon's as it is Fionna and Cake's. So seeing Ooh after the final episode was cool, but like the rest of the show just gets cooler and cooler. And we get to go through a lot of different universes, you know. This is the jaunt, and it's a much more fun multiverse jaunt than most of these multiverse movies that are coming out right now, because we actually get to see a bunch of different universes as opposed to just like one or two. Counting Fionna and Cake's universe, we actually get to see 6 different universes. So during the main multiverse jaunt, we get to see 4 different universes. We get to go back to the farm world, which is cool because I think the farm world's probably a fan favorite. We get to see a universe where Ice King mastered the crown, so got to keep all the power with none of the negative effects. We get the universe where Marceline becomes the evil vampire queen, grows up without a mentor to teach her right from wrong, and so she becomes like full-fledged evil. And then we get to see a universe where everybody is dead. We get to see a universe where, more specifically, all living things are dead, right? So BMO is still alive. Each one of these different universes, they used to take a different central aspect of Adventure Time lore and kind of turn it on its head. Oh my god. Suppose I can't be mad at that. See, this is like the fun what if. This show is what if shit like Multiverse of Madness and that kind of stuff. This show is how multiverse stuff should be done. Maybe like take it in actual new directions and have fun with shit. Like, yeah, use the plot points that people know, but do something that's like actually new with them. So it's kind of interesting. We're coming into Farm World this time around, I guess well after the original visit that we had there, because Finn is no longer Ice Finn. The Destiny gang are still assholes. Finn is even more of a badass now than when we last saw him in the Farm World. Like, almost like comically so.
What do we do if the Destiny gang comes here?
I'll slay them, if I have to.
It was fun. It was fun to go back to Farm World. But as much fun as Farm World was, it wasn't half as fun as the shit that came after it, which is saying something. Because the next universe we go to is one where the Ice King has apparently somehow mastered the power of the crown. And obviously, Simon is very curious as to how he did it. This is the type of stuff with the multiverse that I'm talking about. Looking at alternate possibilities and like what ifs, seeing other versions of yourself, other ways that things could have turned out. Is the Winter King does this really lavish song and dance, and the art style changes and gives this whole thing a very like dreamlike, wondrous atmosphere to it. And the whole time you're like, oh my goodness, this is incredible. A universe where Ice King was able to keep the powers, but without the insanity that came with them. But see, here's where the veneer effect comes in. Adventure Time is so good at doing this. As time goes on, we're lured in by this great musical number and the Winter King's like seemingly wonderful personality. But the longer things go on, the more we start to notice certain things are amiss. Like there's a shot of Marceline playing in the room, but she's all icy, so it's not the real Marceline. Simon asks the Winter King what became of Betty, and he could barely even remember who Betty was. So the longer this whole thing goes on, the more it's like, okay, something's fishy here, something's not right. Which once again, the veneer effect. So in this universe, we find out, which makes sense, that the Candy Kingdom is the kingdom where shit is crazy. Princess Bubblegum is the one who's off her rocker, and she's obsessed with Simon, which is a fun twist on things. So she kidnaps him, Fionna and Cake have to go rescue him, and in the process they end up just just brutally murdering a bunch of candy people, just eviscerating them. And they go to the castle, they rescue Bubblegum, and Simon, who knows that it's not supposed to be like this, is like, something's going on. So essentially you find out that the Winter King was not able to overcome the crown. He was able to put a spell on it that he then used to transfer the madness of the crown to Princess Bubblegum. So it turns out that this Simon was worse than the Ice King, really. What happened to Marceline? What happened to Betty? Who knows? We'll never know. Seeing as how this Simon is, I guess, just completely amoral. And it's also cool because in each one of these universes, it's kind of like we see a different reason why Simon's self-worth should not be as low as it is. In this one, it's like, oh my gosh, look at this guy, he's so perfect, but the whole time he's really like a borderline sociopathic, like, asshole. In the universe where Marceline has taken over, if you want to boil it down, the world literally ended because Simon wasn't there. Simon was the one who taught her right from wrong, and he wasn't there to do that in this universe, so Marceline went on to become the bringer of the apocalypse. Oh, of course. I should have known. You guys got any more ideas for this level? No? Okay. Skeleton Blitz. It's also really interesting because in this world, Bubblegum is this, like, Terminator-esque. She's like this John Connor-esque commando who's fighting this war in the future. Her ally is, of all people, Martin, Finn's deadbeat father, who, funny enough, in this universe bonds more with Finn than he really ever did in the universe that we're used to, because they accidentally bring baby Finn from baby dimension and Martin falls head over heels for this kid. But yeah, the other thing that's fun about this universe is that it represents the unhealthiest possible relationship between Marceline and Bubblegum. And in seeing all of this happen, we realize just how important Simon is. Even though it doesn't seem like he really realizes it in that moment, but you, the viewer, are sitting there going like, holy shit, Simon, in every universe, you're like a nexus fucking being. You know, and then after this dimension, we go to an even worse place, if that's even possible, where it starts off kind of cute, because it's BMO, and then we find out all living things are dead after we see BMO fucking die. So the gimmick in this, the whole thing in this universe is that the Lich won. The Lich's his famous monologue from the episode where Finn lost his arm the first time, the Lich basically made good on that promise in this universe and actually managed to wipe out all living things. And in achieving his purpose, he has basically fallen into despair as well. Like, dude's got nothing to do. So at this point in the show, something really interesting happens. Basically, Fiona reveals that she kept the crown that she snagged from the Winter King's world. Simon's debating whether or not to put it on. And then, finally, he is basically summoned to see Golbetty. An opportunity that the Lich revels in. If you recall, he is the last scholar of gold. Succeeded in his mission to destroy all life in his universe. Feels he's basically like he's earned an audience with gold. And just gets fucking annihilated. It's worth mentioning that this show's a little more mature than previous Adventure Time shows. It's a little bit darker, it's a little bit spookier at times, more violent. There's some nice PG-13 cuss words thrown in here and there. And it makes sense because pretty much everybody who was excited for Fionna and Cake is like my age now. Thank goodness. Christ. Fucking lasers, dude. You get this really cool scene where this red portal appears and Simon drops through it. If you're watching this show, you know what it means. And then his eyes light up and you see the four eyes of gold. You get to see the main villain meet the being that compelled him to do all that. You know, it's just a really cool thing. And it's kind of a meaning that if you're somebody who's like been really following and watching Adventure Time, it's one of those things that you always kind of wanted to see happen. And then he just gets annihilated. It's shown pretty unambiguously that even though Betty is gold now, she's still like Betty. She still has her memories. She still retains consciousness of her former life and all that stuff because she makes several decisions to help Simon. Part of what's fun about the Lich and Gold in Adventure Time is that they're used pretty sparingly. Even though these are our main horses of like evil, we don't actually end up seeing a whole lot of them. Like, Get up here, they can't get me. Of course they can, because they can somehow platform. Cheap. Cheap is what I have to say about that. And one of the most interesting parts is when Goal Betty sends Simon to inhabit the body of the Finn equivalent from an era like long after the show. And it's kind of interesting because this is the time skip, right? We never see how we get to this point. It's kind of cool to imagine the circumstances that would have led to Boo becoming like this, because we recognize certain things. We recognize Turtle Princess being venerated at the library. We recognize that the companion character, the dog, has the abilities of both Jake and his kids. So finally, we get to the finale, where the Scarab uses the portal to enter Fionna and Cake's world and basically decides to tear it apart himself. So the big twist that happens at the end here is that Gold Betty gives Simon the world. She gives him the actual essence of Fionna and Cake's universe, who he then gives to them so that they can be their own people, right? It's very esoteric and kind of weird, but the point is still there. And the big revelation that Simon has through the adventure that he has off in the far future is that Betty has constantly been making sacrifices for him, and he doesn't sacrifice for her like he should. Which, like, I mean, I don't know. I thought it was kind of weird because it's like sure, but then also, I mean, if Simon had had the opportunity to die for Betty, he would have. Is there really any doubt that Simon would have gone to any lengths to keep her safe? But anyway, they become their own thing, so they become canonical. Scarab doesn't like this, freaks out, goes crazy, and then Fionna and Cake use their newfound power to beat him back, basically, until they free a bunch of cosmic gods that he audited. The tables kind of turn on him. So that's fun. And then, of course, while all of this is happening, we get the romance between Gary and Marshall, which is it's really cute and fun. Like, Marshall is an out of work, down on his luck musician, and then Gary is a pastry chef. Obviously, the whole thing is an analogy. He's like Princess Bubblegum. He's creating his own little kingdom by hand. He's giving them all stories and personalities, etc., etc. And it's really funny because they do the scene where he's explaining that in this way, where they juxtapose it against Fionna and Cake just killing the shit out of these alternate versions of all the candy people. It's very funny. I don't know if it's supposed to be like a funny beat, but it's definitely funny. The way that they do the juxtaposition of Gary and Marshall's story against the main journey is really, really cool. Like, there's this one scene where Princess Bubblegum and Marceline are locked in this, like, death struggle. The whole thing, there's, like, weird sexual tension the whole time. It's very probable that even in this universe, Princess Bubblegum and Marceline are attracted to each other, at least on the physical level. Oh yeah, that's real fair. Have them snipe me from behind the trees. Jesus Christ, dude. But yeah, there's a scene at the end of the episode where they're diving from the sky, they're trying to kill each other, and it's juxtaposed against this really nice scene where Marshall has to swallow his pride for his universe's version of Hudson Abadir. She is very well connected. She is like a big corpo person. Marshall Lee wants her to leverage her connections to get Gary funding for his own bakery, basically. And Gary's like, fuck that. You're a wonderful guy, and I'm not going to let you do that. He tells Mrs. Abadir off, and then they kiss. It's this really nice thing. They juxtapose it against Marceline and Princess Bubblegum in this fucked up universe trying to kill each other. And that's just how the episode ends. I love it. What? And then you walk out here and you get sniped from behind the trees. So essentially we get to see the healthiest PB Marcy relationship in the universe and the least healthy relationship of theirs. Again, use the stuff people are familiar with, but take it in new directions. Do fun things with it. Create worlds that are actually new. Don't, change just a few things around and call it new. Really explore what the butterfly effect of these big events being different would be. And as a fan of Adventure Time, it was such a satisfying watch. Not just in the sense of seeing these characters have their stories told. It was also satisfying in the sense of this was a really well told story. It wasn't nice to come back to Ooh just because it's Ooh. It was nice to come back because they told a really cool story with what they had. My heart is very full after having watched it. I'm so glad it was made. I'm so glad I watched it. It's just, if you're an Adventure Time fan, I'd recommend it. And if you're not an Adventure Time fan, give the show a shot. But yeah, I mean, the final thought that I have on this is season 2. Will it happen? Should it happen? I mean, I think so. I don't really know what the plot would be, right? Because Fiona's whole arc in this is she doesn't actually want the thing that she thought that she wanted. She thinks that she wants a world of magic, and then at the end of the story she realizes that the world that she already had was magical in its own way all along. My question is just, like, what story would they even tell? Part of what was cool about this show was how strong of a premise it was. It was an extremely strong premise that allowed them to do a lot of fun things with the show's like established lore. And it just kind of makes me wonder what they could possibly do. And if they decided to bring it back, what direction could they take it? What direction hasn't it gone? Which, like, they called this one season 1, which makes me think that there will be a season 2, because if you're planning on something being a one-shot special, you're not going to call it season 1, right? I would love a season 2, but only if they were able to bring as much fun and creativity and love and passion to it as they were able to bring to this first one. But yeah, that's about all of my thoughts on it, so see you next time.